Lewis, and hi. And I am the senior minister at Middle Collegiate Church. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have in my job title, public theologian, which makes me feel so excited, which means I get to go out in the world and think about talking about God outside of the box. How fun is that, right? So I'm honored to be here at the Wild Goose, and today, this session is called something like Healing the Soul and the World with Fierce Love, right? The subtitle is, How Do We Make an Anti-Racist World? Yeah, how do we make an anti-racist world? So my partner in love, my husband, my free counselor, coach, chief dishwasher, menu planner, is the Reverend John Janka, who's a retired United Methodist clergy. He's United Methodist and I'm Presbyterian. So in a minute, you'll notice that we're in a mixed marriage. So I'm going to ask John to come forward.
Okay.
Well, say hi.
Well, hello. So in my title is John Janka, theoretically retired. It's all theoretical. Okay.
Here's what we're going to try to do today. We both believe in the power of stories. We are people of the book. We are people of the story, and that's how stories shape our identity. Stories build our identity. Stories have a beginning and a middle and an end. So we're going to use a narrative approach to what we're sharing today. John's going to tell you a story of being a white man in America learning to be an anti-racist. I'm going to tell you the story of a black woman in the world learning to be an anti-racist. And then we're going to leave time for Q&A, about 15 minutes maybe, okay? That's our aim, so we can talk with you some. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Here's John.
Okay, it's great to see you all. This reminds me, this temperature, of being in elementary school without air conditioning. In the end of June, we have 3 days left to sit there. We're looking out the window. We can't hear a thing the teacher's saying. So do your best to listen and tune in. We'll do our best to tell you what we want to share. So a lot of our work together is helping congregations think about their role around race, inclusion, equity, and diversity. And so we're going to talk a good bit about that today. But it starts with our individual story. So my story might be under the title of My Great Awakening. So this starts for me with a family story, actually. My grandfather, who in 1930 quit his job with a corporation and decided to open his own corner store and butchery. So he did that, and my grandmother functioned as the money manager. My grandfather in the 30s found himself in a position where people were coming to him who were low on resources and low on food. And so he would carry them on the books, you all know what that means, right? To my grandmother's chagrin, who was managing the money. And he would do that for the community, his patrons and so on. And some of them were African Americans in the community. It turns out that his brother learned that he was carrying on the books some black people as well as some white people. His brother, it turns out, was an active member of the KKK. And so that led to his first being threatened, secondly being boycotted, and thirdly being put out of business. That's the family story behind, before I ever made it to the planet, was that story, which was a formative story for me and helped me think about race as a broad topic, but a very specific one in my ancestry. Moving forward from there, and I should add here that excavating our story is what we're doing, and we're going to ask you to think about how you would excavate your story around race. So track what we're saying and see if you can apply it to your own story. moving from there, it was being a young teenager and finding myself educated by Walter Cronkite on the 6 o'clock news, watching the images of the early civil rights movement and being amazed and appalled at people non-violently protesting and being attacked by dogs and police with batons. And I couldn't understand it except to be furious about it. How can this happen? So watching those images transformed me and gave me a whole set of questions to explore through my adolescence. Beyond that then, I was aware that in my world, I lived in a completely white bubble. There were no people of color in my world. Not in my school, not in my church, not in my neighborhood, not in my life in any way. So many of you face the same story, probably. And so here we are at this point in time as white people doing some catching up, still doing some catching up around the dynamics of race in this country. At the age of about 14, I felt a call to ministry. At age 15, my minister came to me and said, "I would like you to preach one Sunday." It scared me to death. I didn't know much about the Bible at 15. I knew one story predominantly, and that was the Good Samaritan story. So I fashioned a sermon. He said, "I want you to write it yourself, but if you need help, let me know." So anyway, fast forward, I preached the sermon on some Sunday in early May. Following the sermon, the congregation went out and greeted me at the door. Very affirming and encouraging comments were made. The chair of the Board of Trustees of the church lingered behind. When everyone was gone, he cornered me at the front door and reamed me out because I referred in my sermon as Martin Luther King Jr. being a good Samaritan, caring for his neighbors. He reamed me out, telling me I should never feel that I can bring that communist into the church through my sermons. He spent a good 10 minutes telling me how he felt. It wasn't until some years later I learned that he was a member of the John Birch Society. This was in the suburbs of Philadelphia, everybody, the city of brotherly love. So I had a hard lesson in that moment that there were certain situations in which I could not be white enough for some of the people around me. Do you understand what that means? Not white enough. When you're not white enough, you run the risk of losing the protections of the white culture, the benefits of the white culture, the safety of the white culture. So I was already at a young age of 15, for some people, under suspicion. Fast forward from there, let's go to seminary. So I went to seminary. This was at a time when no one was talking about Black history or the civil rights movement, not really. But in this case, there were courses offered to seminarians, very few people in the classes that I took, one on Black history and one on the dynamics of racism. So I learned a lot in those classes, and I found myself in a student appointment working in Paterson, New Jersey, which was heavily African American. I learned a lot through that experience. Then I moved into the United Methodist Church system for ordination. And my very first appointment was doing youth work and education in a large Methodist church. Adjacent to that church in the community was a small African-American Methodist church who couldn't afford a pastor, and so I, as the associate on the big church staff, was asked to preach there twice a month. The organist's name was Roselia Cobb. She was a school teacher in the town, and Roselia, for some reason, decided I was worth educating in racism. She was the organist, a teacher. She ruled with a strong hand. She had no mercy on me, but she must have loved me to teach me the things that she had me learn. She was a gift to me. We ended up doing a week of camp together, which we called Other People, Other Places, and we intentionally recruited a diverse group of kids to come, 5th and 6th graders. You might think they didn't know very much about race, but one of the first experiences we asked them to do was to write on newsprint all the names that they had for people of other backgrounds. They knew names for Latino, Hispanic, and African American that I had not known myself. But they had those names down pretty good. So the journey included taking some risks, putting myself finally in a white congregation in Camden, New Jersey, a small city across the Delaware from Philadelphia. White congregation in an ethnically, racially changing neighborhood. They had been declining in membership for years, but had chose to ignore it. White people moving out, white flight, classic. While Asian, Latino, and African Americans were moving in. So a lot of their members got out, so to speak. They got out. But a lot of them were still there. They hadn't sold their homes, and the value of their homes were in decline. That's how the system works. So they were angry. They were angry at the people moving in. They were angry at their circumstances. They were angry that the homes they bought that were going to be part of their plan of retirement were declining in value. Now they were feeling really stuck. When I got there, I thought, if there's any one thing I can do, it would be to help them try to turn a corner and invite some people in who were not looking like them. Grudgingly, they permitted me to put a little committee together. I could find 4 people only who would decide to work with me on exploring options for their future. One of the options was that we would transition this white church into an ethnically, racially diverse congregation. From my perspective, it was the only way they were going to ensure they had a future in that place. Well, fast forward, we had a congregational meeting at which we presented our plan. And unbeknownst to me, they had a lot of folks who had moved out of the area into suburban neighborhoods that were a ring around Camden, New Jersey, but they were still on the membership rolls, so technically they could still vote. And they organized, and I still to this day I give them credit for their organizational skills. They got the word out to everybody, come to this meeting. We need you there to vote. And they did. They came in numbers, and they defeated the plan. This was in May. If you know anything about Methodists, they move pastors in July. So I had passed the point where I had an option to move. One of the toughest things I ever had to do was to preach to that congregation for an entire year after they had rejected everything I had worked for. So fast forward again, I get the opportunity to go and work at the Alban Institute in Washington, D.C. and to be on their staff. That was a nonprofit that provided resources for churches and fielded consultants and all of those kinds of things. And in that job, there was someone else on the staff who was doing a particular project, and that project was called Negotiating Cultural Boundaries. So I was asked to go on the team. That's how I met Jacqui Lewis. We met, we worked together, we've been working on these issues ever since. But when I think about my Great Awakening, it really got serious then. So Jacqui became my tutor, the one who introduced me to readings, to research that's been done, to demographics, to all of the elements that are a part of the dynamic of race in our culture. And so I want to say to you that one of the most important things you can do as a white person is be your own researcher. Read, read, read. There's a lot of stuff in the world now that wasn't there years ago. Research done, important works that have been set to the page, available to us. And in the churches where you're active, you need to be in conversation about this stuff. Whether you are in a diverse neighborhood or not, you need to see this racial work as a spiritual discipline where you are. Whether in a diverse community or not, but if you are in a diverse community, it is especially essential that you do this work. So I'm going to stop there because I used up my 15 minutes, and I'm going to ask my partner to come up and share some story with you.
Thank you, John. When you live with John Janka, you are working on anti-racist practices 24/7 every day. From who picks the menu and who decides which restaurant to go to who's washing the dishes, etc. There's always a racial dynamic to everything. Do you know why? Because there's always a racial dynamic to everything. Do you know why? Because there's always a racial dynamic to everything here in these United States. Truly, if you're not bumping up against racial dynamics here in the United States, you're probably living in a segregated context. And if you're living in a segregated context, good on ya, but heaven's not segregated. So I'm thinking it's really good to think about how we bump into our neighbors, yeah? Let me say a couple things about my story. You're going to hear more in my sermon tomorrow, but I want to say my mom and dad grew up in Mississippi. I shared that from this stage the other day. So race mattered in their growing up, right? They lived in 1934 and 1937 they were born. They lived in Jim Crow. They lived in poverty. They lived learning how to walk past the white school or the school to go to the colored school. They learned how to avoid eye contact with white people on the street so they would stay safe. They learned how to bend their head just a little bit and say yes, ma'am, and no, sir, so as not to be perceived as sassy, because sassy was dangerous. And they also learned somehow in their faith life that what they were experiencing wasn't God's will, right? They're just like, no, that's not what's supposed to be happening. I don't think my mom and dad would have used the word hermeneutic, or they would have used the word, exposition or exegesis, but they had grown up in these black churches, one black and Catholic and the other black and Baptist, where the clergy and the church mamas and the church daddies, the deacon board, the usher board, the people with the white gloves, standing at attention to make sure if you got the Holy Spirit, you didn't die from it, All of those people, I'm going to fan you. All of those people in that village had also been raised in Jim Crow South with segregation as a given, but they had caught a holy imagination for this thing called heaven. and had the feeling, like I'm talking about the canon that would have been their canon, right? Would have been about, there's a mansion for me, in that great getting up morning, and I saw a holy city, right? And there was a river running through it. All the people were praising God in one voice, right? From Genesis to Revelation, they had found a canon that was being preached to them alongside spirituals and gospel music and blues, I think also. We're gonna sing, we're gonna cry, we're gonna pray, and we're going to expect the world to be different. And I want to say that they stuck that into us, so that my inner canon was not shaped by God is white and white is right, but my inner canon was shaped by love all the people. And love means love the stranger. And that Good Samaritan story that John preached and got in trouble for, that was a core story in our upbringing, that when Jesus was trying to say what neighbor love looked like, he picked an outsider to depict. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the Samaritans were the black people, if you will, of Judaism, or the inward of Judaism. They were the outsiders in Judaism. And so mom, dad, pastors somehow lifted that up in my imagination, that God had a preference for the outsider, that God had a preference for the marginalized. So that worked for me. When I was almost 9, Dr. King was killed, and that was a very formative story in my life. I bet you for many of us, that was a formative story in our lives. Wave your hand if that was kind of traumatic and cataclysmic, but also if the world can kill love, well, darn, we have work to do, right? If the world can kill love, we have work to do. So I felt kind of called into ministry then, and I was a girl, and girls couldn't preach. So I had to tuck it away into maybe I'll go to law school and do civil rights law until I was 30 and got a different story in my mind. My parents hustled to send kids to college, 5 of us. They hustled, saved their money, struggled to get us into college so that education would be a kind of lift up for us, do better than they did. College was a weird and wonderful time of all the things that were weird and wonderful for all of us. I don't think I should share. It's not important. Wink here. But we did college, all of us, and on the other side of that, I was still wrestling with this call to ministry, so I ended up in corporate America, because why wouldn't you do that if you're wrestling? But when I went to seminary finally, I want to say when I was 30, I felt like I was ready to do what God was calling me to do, because I had been selling copiers. I'm like, if you can sell copiers, you can sell Jesus. It's a better product, So that was all good. But I also really felt clear that my job was to be a JUM major for peace. Like I had caught the bug from Dr. King that I was supposed to work for racial justice, for economic justice, for a just society. And I walked into Middle Church when I was writing my Ph.D. I want to just say, if you want to see the craziest, wildest mashup of human beings, go to middlechurch.org and strap in. I mean, we got your drag queens at the door passing out bulletins. We've got young people and old people preaching and teaching, white, Hispanic, indigenous, Asian, and I want to say white of all flavors, because white is not an ethnicity. Well, hallelujah. White is not an ethnicity. It's a construct, right? So all the ethnicities are there, trying hard. Trying hard. We got stuff, because why? Race matters all the time. Sometimes it's hard for people to be told what to do by a black woman, no matter, what her title is. So it's a challenge, but it's a blessing. And I want to stop with that story there to say something to you about your story. John just kind of did a quick little bip across his story to get to how we met. My bip across the story takes us to meeting each other at the Alban Institute. I'm working on my dissertation. I'm studying how race happens. That's my degree. How do we become raced? What does that look like, right? So if you read this book, our Central Strategies book, you'll hear some of that. My Power of Stories book is that. Race is a construct. Race is a story. That's why John and I wanted to do story. There's only one race. What is it? Say it again. And everything else is about ethnicity. It's about German and Russian, and it's about Lithuanian, and it's about Ghanaian, and it's about Ethiopian, right? It's about Hmong and Vietnamese and Japanese and Chinese, right? It's about Dominican and Puerto Rican. This is what we're talking about, but we collapse it in the United States of America and around the Western world into race because it's easy and because race is a social, political, theological, theoretical construct that allowed America to be built on stolen land by stolen people. You know that, right? So let's hear a louder amen. You know that, right? And if you need a reminder of that, my Fierce Love book takes us through some of that, but you know that. The thing is that not enough of us talk about that, right? Not enough of us push it around and be like, you know, when the white people like, tell me what you mean by white. You know, just to be having a suspicious question about that, right? When the black people, like, tell me what you mean by black. Like, what are we talking about when we ascribe characteristics to physiognomy, right? That's another thing we're talking about. Shorter legs, longer legs, thinner noses, eye shape. The way humans developed in the kind of evolutionary sense, we all are from Africa. Come on, African Americans. Nod with me. Come on. All of you are from Africa. You just are. We stood up in Africa. We stood up and developed voice and ability to reach and build things in Africa. And then we started moving around the globe and started looking differently to adapt, to be the people we needed to be to survive. I want you to claim that African-centeredness in your life, because then you can claim Ubuntu, which is something I'm going to say 2 sentences about, and then I'm going to tell you, read my book. Right? But before there was a religion, right? Before there was a religion, there was us being human. We didn't know there was a God, right? We were coming from animal kingdom. We were evolving. We were trying to figure out how to make meaning of the world. Why isn't the corn growing? Why is the sun setting? Why is there a storm? Why isn't my spouse pregnant? Where's our progeny? Why did our baby die? Why are we not safe from our enemies? You feel me? Human questions about human condition that leads to God. That leads to God. I think there's a God. Jacqui believes in God. But God's also a mystery. We're making up a lot of things about God because we have no idea. And primitive people had totems. I know what? We're going to carve this one. And we're going to pray to this one, right? We're going to put this one over here in the field. We're going to put this one in the shrine. We're going to build this pyramid. We're going to build these God things, these Godheads, these theological, physical representations so we can be safe and we can be okay, right? And a lot of those God things look like what? White people. No, the people who told the story often got to create the image. The people who told the story often got to paint the paintings. My black friends are like, mm-hmm. The people who had the power, who had the pen, who had the printing presses, often put pictures and stories in the biblical text that look like them, because why wouldn't you? I'm not saying that was evil. I'm saying it happened. Just like if you go to Ethiopia, you're going to see a nice chocolatey Jesus with some dreadlocks, right? What I'm trying to say is, we have no idea what God is like, but we do know that God is the originator of this story called human. That's our faith claim. And in that faith claim, every single one of us is created in God's image, not just the white people. Amen. And not just the black people, hello? So if we're going to claim these stories, in that story, all of us are a little like God. And the psalmist says that. And when we're disquieted by that, the exegesis should be like, well, it actually says a little less like angels. No, it does not. It says a little less than Elohim, which is God. So now, take a breath and think about your story for just a minute. Just a minute. How you got to be you. Grandfathers and mothers and Ku Klux Klan burnings and Dr. King is killed and Jim Crow parents. What about you? What's your kind of race biography? How did you get to sit in these chairs today because of what happened? Your grandmother, your mother, your father, your uncles, your aunties, who taught you what about race? Do you understand what I'm inviting? You're going to need to take some time in the journal on this one, honey, because we can't really do it here. But I will ask you to take a second and turn and talk. Just a second, just a minute, which means you're going to share a minute each. This is something you can do at home for longer. But this idea of the stories of race, the story of race, you have one. So will you turn to your neighbor? I'm literally going to give you 1 minute and then another one. Well, let me tell you the question. The question is, when did I first know? When did I first know there was a thing called race? Are you with me? When did I first know there was a thing called race? Are you ready? Turn to your neighbor. Let me see who you're talking to. Show me what you got. Okay. And go. I love the way you engage that. How did that feel? How did it feel to tell somebody your race, a little bit of your race story? How was that? It's okay? It was good? If you're at home and you do this, and you will, please do this, you could do a whole session on tell me the first time you knew that there was a thing about race. What was that story like? What role were you in that story? Do you see playing it out more? What did you learn from that? Have you had any other experiences like that that made you feel that way? I'll bet you something about size. I'll bet you something about sports ability, right? I'll bet you something about your body. I'll bet you something about a lisp, right? So when we do that storytelling about the race thing, which is huge and big, and you help people to get to, yes, oh yeah, about being not an athlete or not feeling like I was popular, even though those maybe don't feel as big and maybe they're not. When it happened to you, it felt big. And that sense of left outedness or not part of itness is a place where empathy can grow about how it feels for people to be Black, brown, Asian, Hispanic in America. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you're helping your maybe whiter than mine context get into a place where we can be vulnerable about how the story of race hurts all of us. Did you guys know Race, the story, The Power of an Illusion? Do you know that resource? It's still on PBS, right? That is shocking. It's old and fabulous. Race, The Power of an Illusion is a maybe 12-part series on PBS that you can still get that talks about the science of race, talks about eugenics, how we've just made race a whole thing that it is not. It talks about the way race, the narrative of race gets into school systems and healthcare and the church, right? This is, to me, our 21st, 2nd, 3rd. W.E.B. Du Bois said that the color line was the issue of the 20th century. I'm going to go 21st, 22nd, 23rd until we get it right. Until we look at each other and see all of us have ethnicity, but some of us have skin color that passes for white, and that in a world where white power matters, racism, white supremacy exists. We're not going to make it go away if we stop calling it racism. We're not going to make it go away if we stop saying the word white, because the word white is in the thing. But we could do better. We could do better if we acknowledge the humongous power differential. I'm going to give you one stat as a short story, because stats are short stories. Today, a family of 4, white family of 4, makes $15 times more than a black family. Can I say that better? If a black family is bringing home $15, a white family is bringing home $100. I'm talking about that kind of ratio. African American men make up about 13% of the population, but African American men make up about 37% of the people incarcerated. It isn't because black men are indigenously criminal. That's not what it is, but it is that our systems and our structures are made for this economic disparity. They're made for this criminology or this criminal injustice system disparity. I'm talking about black rates of death at births, black maternal deaths, black diabetes, black high pressure, black COVID, black school systems, black unsafety, because America was built on a fault line of race. And we who believe in freedom, who are also Christian, we have to build this into the ministries we're doing. And this book, I'm not always one where I read my book, but this book is just a really practical book that John and I wrote, 10 Essential Strategies for Building Multiracial Churches. If your church has all white people, this is a book for you. If your church has some people of color, this is a book for you. How do you build worship that celebrates diversity? How do you build your board members' capacities to talk about race? How do you grow a system that is anti-racist? This book is for you, if that's what your intention is. And so I think I'm going to stop and give you a chance to ask questions after I painted one more picture for you. Picture this, picture this, picture worship. Picture worship where on any given Sunday you might hear, Holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty, my favorite hymn of all times. And you might also hear a classical piece of music from Verdi, because that's a spiritual language, right? And you might also hear a poem by Jimmy Baldwin, because it's his centennial, right? And you might hear a song from The Greatest Show called This Is Me, because we're celebrating queer bodies and amazingness, right? You might hear a sermon preached by a black lady in dreadlocks who's exegeting Calvin and Katie Cannon at the same time, because that's how we need to be multivocal, you know? And you will see children of the rainbow of colors sitting all over the place making noise. Why? Because worship rehearses the reign of God. Worship, meaning the worthship of God, rehearses the worthiness of God's intention for the world. You hear what I mean? Worship rehearses what God is promising in God's word, that we were all going to be praising God in one voice, that there will be no more tears, that there will be no more pain, that there will be no more heartache, that all of the people will have enough, that the world will flourish. Do you feel me? The Bible that serves us as guide and teacher does not have wired into it us building a world where some of us on the bottom and some of us on the top, where some people's got some knees on their neck and some of us don't. So our worship is what I'm inviting you, needs to story, I'm turning that into a verb, our worship needs to story God's intention for a healed, whole world in which all of us get along and in which all of us have enough, right? So I'm giving you practical tools in here about how to use music from other cultures, how to partner with other congregations from other cultures, how to make your worship invitational enough that people from other cultures will find their way in to hear the good news of God's gospel in the name of Jesus Christ. You feel that? So get the book. Learn about how to make worship. Don't be apologetic about singing. Lift every voice and sing. Just sing it right. Slow down that third verse. Hello, give me a retard. All right? Okay. And I'm gonna invite you to ask us a few questions, and then we're both gonna close. Okay? Does that feel all right? We've got a microphone. How you doing? Okay. It's hot, but otherwise, right? I'm taking this off now. Pictures of girl naked coming now, as opposed to. Okay. What you got? Right here.
Okay, now we're on. Jacqui, as always, it's fantastic. But I must ask you, as you and John have gone around, name the one thing that has surprised you the most about how staid we are as white people where we are.
Ooh. Well, one happened here. I mean, all the time, everywhere I speak. I'm always on the nice white people tour. And people invite me to come and talk about race because they know that I'm going to be invitational and whatever. But I think whiteness trumps my voice often. It's subtle, but I think it's consistent that a white male presence trumps most black women's voices. It just does. So all the time, and I'm used to be like, oh, that's how it is, but now I'm more like, let's call it out. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Somebody got a question for Mr. John?
Well, I'll piggyback on the last question. I do a lot of consulting with congregations. And one of the things I notice is that we as white people tend to comfort ourselves with messages that we're okay. We read that book. We saw that movie. We got it. I just want to say we don't got it. This is a lifelong journey, folks. And so if you're not down for it, don't tell yourself messages like that. There is work to do. Just fashioning an alternative vision for the church itself is a huge problem for most white congregations. And when you pose the concepts of diversity and what it can mean to bring vitality into your worship and life together as a faith community, the counter is they don't want to come, and we don't have the energy to go get them, even if we wanted to. So I would say, hearken back to a quote from Martin Luther King from the Birmingham jail, where he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, "I fear that the greatest obstacle to the advancement of the Negro people is not the KKK member or the white citizens counselor, but it is the moderate white person who keeps us from achieving our goals." So I want us to be sure and clear that we all have work to do, and it's probably the most important work for us to do. I was amazed, I have to say this, because some of you may have been in the room at the time. On Thursday, Jacqui asked the question of the group assembled. It was in this space. How many of you have a close friend of a different ethnicity? Was that the question?
Kinda. Sorta. Yeah.
How many? And every hand in the room went up, virtually. And I had to think to myself, well, if that's true, why haven't they been invited here? Where are they?
All right, Reverend Janka.
Okay, I'll stop.
We're going to take this question.
Okay, so I want to say that I'm one of those nice white people that get in the way. Just claim that with a red face. You mentioned, so I'm a retired librarian, almost, not quite, but I know where you're coming from. You talked about read and read and read. I'm hoping your book, which I bought, will have some resources in it of things that our congregation needs to read. We've read some, we're reading some more, but you might talk a little bit about that also. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
No, I'll just say, John, there is a curriculum about anti-racist resources at middlechurch.org, and we are updating that all the time. We also just finished cutting up 16 years of conferences around race. So we'll be able to put these different modules, you understand, like different modules about race for you to go to online in class. Yeah? So yes, there's resources at the back of the book. Yes, we'll have resources on the website always. And yes, we think we are trying to teach you here and there, okay? And then we're going to meet me at the book signing. Let's talk some more, and we'll be together this afternoon at 5.
Hi, this might not be a quick answer, but I'll try and make the question quick. I'm in doing my own research. I sort of came across an idea that always blending churches can impose on safe space of a black church. And so I want to know if you have some good practical suggestions for bringing people together without causing that situation where I would be imposing on a safe space.
Excellent. You will be imposing on a safe space. You will. And a book called Curtis DeYoung is the author of a book about multi-ethnic churches, and he and the other sociologists actually argue Korean first generation, black churches, indigenous, there's a need sometimes for that like safe ethnic church, period. So it's not safe to integrate, but it's right. So we really do have skill building to do around that, leadership development to do around that, so that the place becomes brave and safe. So yes, in the book, resources there, but that's an excellent question. And I just want to start with the premise that it's risky for everybody. Fuller Seminary teaches if you want to grow your church, keep it segregated. Well, I think that's a little bit BS, but they say it. But I think we need to do better. Yeah. One more. Just shout it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thursday we had a moment where I felt like a black girl not being listened to, and she wants to know what can we do as nice white people when that thing happens. Yeah, see something, say something. Call on the black speaker. That part right there, my people are saying. There's a way in which we're all taught that white guys know more. So I say call on the woman first. I say if the woman's not talking, you say, can we hear from Betsy? We'd like to invite Betsy to step up. Change the scenario. And when you're doing the inviting, put women of color in the front and celebrate them. Yeah. Okay? Yeah.
Can I add that?
Yes. John's asking me, can I add something? Now, see, that's some anti-racist work right there. Go ahead, John.
One of the things I want to observe is that any time those of us who look like me walk into a room where diversity is present, we need to know that there is suspicion, there will be awareness, there will be a sense of question about how is this going to go, there will be concern about whether everyone who's in the room will be heard, and it should be incumbent upon us that when we walk into that room, our antenna is up, our awareness is keen, and we're listening, and we're watching for opportunity to help us in whatever group that is to do better around these issues. So give room, give space. Don't be the first one to talk, although Jacqui told me I could today.
White people got to teach white people. That's
Right.
why.
Don't be the first one to talk, and don't talk as though you've got all the answers.
Amen. With that, can I close you with a benediction? Because I'm over, but I'm going to benedict you. It is a sung benediction. I'm not a great singer, but listen to these words, okay? You ready? Oh, say, can't you see what is plain to behold? Though we shout liberty, there are too many in chains. We are shackled by greed and the fear we are small. But this truth must be told. There is one God who loves all. Won't you give me your hand, and together we'll stand with radical love, heal our souls and our land. Oh, say, can't we end all this fighting and strife and walk toward the light, that we all might be free?